Welcome students to this session on Learning Unit 7, Transnational Issues, the Flow of People. As with Learning Unit 5, Learning Unit 7 is directly assessed in the exam portfolio and is linked specifically to questions 4 and 6, while it can also contribute to question 7's critical reflection. So let me provide some clarity front what Learning Unit 7 covers and what the exam does not require. The unit has three major sections: migration, diplomacy, and tourism. For this exam portfolio, migration is background knowledge only, and it will not be directly assessed. Diplomacy and tourism are the two sections students must know in depth. So let's then begin with a clear map of what Learning Unit 7 covers and exactly which exam questions it feeds. Here we have the 8 thematic areas of Learning Unit 7. As I've just mentioned, the migration section is not directly assessed in the exam portfolio. So we have migration, its history, forms, causes, and implications; diplomacy, formal, public, cultural, and media diplomacy; agenda setting and framing, focusing on the work done by Semetko and Falkenberg; propaganda as a form of traditional diplomacy; soft power versus hard power as proposed by Hayden; international tourism, who are the actors, what are the factors, and how does it flow; then academic, sport, and cultural exchanges; and finally, alternative tourism, which includes ecotourism, social tourism, and solidarity. So the three exam questions that draw on Learning Unit 7 is question 4. Here we look at public diplomacy, nation building, and media. And then question 7, which is in the international flow of people, where you will look at 2 of 3 dimensions. And those dimensions will be international tourism, and it's for actors, conference and event tourism as diplomatic communication, and then academic, cultural, or sports exchanges. Okay, and then also obviously, as I've mentioned, the critical reflection. In Learning Unit 7, you will see there's a lot of rich theoretical ammunition for both sides of the debate in in question 7. So you can, for example, draw on soft power, you can draw on the host image concept and on propaganda theory alongside the content of Learning Unit 5. So let's start building the core of Learning Unit 7 content, beginning with the foundational concept, which is diplomacy. So Gilbao in 2000 said, "Diplomacy is a communication system through which representatives of states engage each other on pertinent issues pertaining to their respective states, centering countries' interests, articulating grievances, and issuing demands or ultimatums. It is also used to clarify positions, seek information, and persuade other role players." So this definition is the most important single citation in this section, and you need to know it. But let's unpack the definition. 3 elements deserve attention. Firstly, the communication system. So diplomacy is fundamentally a communication practice. This is why it belongs in an international communication model. It's not just about politics or foreign policy. It's about how messages, positions, and interests are transmitted between state actors. Then secondly, clarify positions, seek information, persuade. These are the communicative functions. Each of these maps onto specific diplomatic practices. Clarification happens through formal communiques, seeking information happens through intelligence and open diplomacy, and persuasion happens through public diplomacy and propaganda. And then thirdly, branding and building the image of the country. Crucially, the Learning Unit 7 text explicitly states that countries use diplomacy as a form of branding, and this bridges Learning Unit 7 directly to your prescribed readings and to the case of Rwanda. So now let's walk through the 4 forms at the bottom of the slide here. Formal diplomacy, this is government to government, and it is characterized by secrecy. So it's closed door, but sometimes also open door variations. There are very specific, clear protocols in place for this, and it's and the media is very often excluded here. In the case of Rwanda, Rwanda's hosting of the CHOGM, sits here. Public diplomacy. This is state and non-state actors that are targeting foreign publics. So state and non-state actors use media and communication to influence public opinion in foreign societies. Rwanda's Visit Rwanda campaign, the Arsenal sponsorship, diplomatic social media all sit here. Then we move to media diplomacy. And this is where we get journalists as diplomatic actors. And so they are assuming the role of diplomats or mediators in international negotiations. Media is, in other words, setting the agenda for international politics. So here we can look at the international media coverage of Rwanda, both positive and critical. This sits here. Finally, cultural diplomacy. This is government-driven but non-political communication with foreign publics via language, art, education, sport, and academic exchanges. Rwanda's guerrilla conservation narrative and its academic event hosting sit here. So let's now go deeper into formal diplomacy and its three subtypes: secret, closed door, and open. So here we look at the internal taxonomy of formal diplomacy, which is primarily drawn from Gilbao. You need to understand the logic of the spectrum, from total exclusion of the public and media through partial transparency to full public access. So when we look at secret diplomacy, the rationale for secrecy is important to convey. It's not simply about deception. It reflects the genuine communicative risk of premature disclosure. If negotiations break down, for example, and the public knows about it, violent conflict can result. Diplomats and representatives often feel that disclosing positions or concessions puts additional pressure on negotiations and can wreck the entire process. This is why politicians prefer secret diplomacy even in democratic societies. So for Rwanda, when the Rwandan government engages in sensitive diplomatic negotiations, for example, around its military presence in the DRC, or discussions with human rights organizations, these are conducted through closed or secret channels. The public version of these engagements is very carefully managed. Moving along to closed-door diplomacy, this is the most common form in contemporary international relations. The media are told that talks are happening and they are given technical details, like the venue, the date, and the participants, but they are excluded from the substance. A news blackout is drawn once the actual negotiations begin. And this satisfies the democratic demand for transparency without exposing the vulnerability of negotiating positions. So how does this connect to Rwanda? The scenario notes that Rwanda contests vigorously through diplomatic channels the human rights characterizations made by HRW and Amnesty International. This contestation happens largely through closed-door diplomatic channels and not in public. And then finally, open diplomacy. This is where events like CHOGM and WEF sit. Rwanda deliberately chose to host events that are maximally public and media accessible, not because this is how diplomacy typically works, but because the diplomatic visibility is itself the marketing asset. CHOGM 2022, with 56 nations gathered in Kigali, generated enormous international media coverage of Kigali as a functional, world-class conference destination. This is open diplomacy deployed as a public relations strategy. So what can we look here at as our key analytical point? Rwanda operates differently across these three subtypes simultaneously at the same time. It uses open diplomacy for its brand building events, closed-door diplomacy for sensitive governance conversations, and secret diplomacy for its most controversial geopolitical engagements. So building on formal diplomacy, let's now examine public diplomacy and media diplomacy. The key distinction from formal diplomacy when we look at public diplomacy is the target audience. Formal diplomacy targets other governments. Public diplomacy targets foreign publics, the ordinary citizens of other countries. This is why Rwanda invests in Instagram campaigns, influencer partnerships, and the Arsenal shirt. These reach foreign publics, not foreign governments, directly. It's important here to draw your attention to the subsets of public diplomacy that is embedded in Learning Unit 7. We have traditional diplomacy. This includes propaganda. So this is state-to-public communication using media. Then diplomacy via NGOs. This is non-state actors carrying diplomatic functions. Media diplomacy or media broker diplomacy, and this is the distinctive subtype where journalists become diplomatic actors. The Rwanda link here is essential. Every element of Rwanda's digital strategy, their social media accounts, their Visit Rwanda content, their influencer partnerships, their diplomatic mission social media, constitutes public diplomacy in Gilbao's sense. These are all state or state-affiliated actors using media to influence public opinion in foreign societies. The key tension to note here is public diplomacy can be contested. Rwanda's official messaging competes with critical messages from the HRW, Amnesty International, and international journalists covering the DRC. The state cannot control all public diplomacy directed at foreign publics. Some of it works against the state. And this is the contested digital information environment that is referenced in your exam portfolio scenario. Now we turn to media diplomacy. The concept of journalists as diplomatic actors is counterintuitive, but at the same time worth dwelling on. Gilbao's insight is that when media cover international negotiations, they are not merely reporting, they are participating. By choosing what to cover, how to frame it, and which sources to prioritize, journalists shape the negotiating environment. So here we have a bit of a link to your prescribed reading by Jane and Winner. Jane and Winner argues that news media plays a central role in constructing country reputation. This connects directly to Gilbao's media diplomacy concept. International news media constructing Rwanda's reputation is media diplomacy, whether or not anyone intended it that way. Now we can also look at the link with agenda setting. And this is something that will be covered in more depth in the next slide, but let's introduce the concept here. Media agenda setting is the mechanism by which media diplomacy operates. By controlling what issues receive coverage, media shapes what issues are salient in international relations. So agenda setting and framing are the specific tools then through which media diplomacy operates. So let's examine these in detail. The McCombs and Shaw or Borchers formulation is actually quite elegant and memorable. It says, the media may not be able to tell the public what to think, but media are effective at telling the public what to think about. And I really do like that. This distinction is crucial for understanding media power in international relations. So how does this apply to Rwanda? International media cannot directly determine whether audiences like or dislike Rwanda, but they can ensure that certain issues, guerrilla conservation and political repression and DRC military involvement, receive coverage. Once an issue is on the agenda, in other words, receiving coverage, it becomes salient in public consciousness. So Rwanda cannot make international media ignore its human rights record. That is permanently on the agenda through the HRW and Amnesty International reports. Rwanda can only try to counter-program with competing agenda items. The point about officials losing control to media producers, which Gilbao makes, is important. In the digital era, state actors have reduced ability to dictate what is covered. Rwanda's government communicators are engaged in an ongoing asymmetric struggle to manage an agenda they do not control. Now we turn our attention to framing. And this is the most specific piece of media theory in Learning Unit 7. And you need to be able to name the various frames. So let's look at these frames. We have the attribution of responsibility. So that's It refers to who is responsible for a problem. So serious media most often uses this frame. In terms of Rwanda, for example, is Rwanda responsible for positive development or for political repression? The next dominant frame is conflict. Who are the opposing sides? And this is relevant to DRC coverage. The next frame is human interest. This is a personalized emotional angle. And sensationalist media prefers this. Guerrilla trekking stories often use human interest framing. For example, individual tourists' emotional encounters. The fourth frame is economic consequences. And this refers to financial impact, and it's relevant to Rwanda's investment attraction story. The final dominant frame is morality, and this refers to ethical judgments, and it's relevant to their human rights coverage. So if we look at the key finding from Sametko and Falkenberg is that the important distinction is not between television and print media, but between serious and sensationalist outlets. Serious outlets use responsibility and conflict frames. Sensationalist outlets use human interest. And this has direct implications for Rwanda. The BBC, Reuters, and The Economist, they are all serious, but they are all likely to frame Rwanda through responsibility and conflict lenses. Travel magazines, which are seen as sensationalist or promotional, use human interest framing and present guerrilla trekking stories with emotional warmth. So now let's turn to cultural diplomacy and the concept of soft power, which is central to Rwanda's reputational strategy. Cultural diplomacy bridges the diplomacy and tourism sections of Learning Unit 7. Cultural diplomacy is a government-driven endeavor to circumvent commercial media impressions of a country through direct, non-political communication with foreign publics. And what is important here are the tools that are used, its purpose, the brand link. The definition, as I've just mentioned, is important. It's government-driven. It operates at a non-political level. And this seems paradoxical, and this is the key analytical tension here. Cultural diplomacy is used to achieve political goals, influencing foreign publics towards supporting the government's foreign policy. But it's conducted through cultural, educational, and artistic channels, so it appears non-political. Rwanda's guerrilla conservation narrative is an excellent example. On the surface, it's an environmental and tourism story, but it serves the political goal of associating Rwanda with responsible stewardship, environmental leadership, and international goodwill. It is cultural diplomacy in the service of national brand management. But now let's look at the brand connection. Learning Unit 7 explicitly states that cultural diplomacy is intertwined with brand management. Both create emotional value-based propositions that translate into flexible symbols. And this is exactly what several of your prescribed readings for Rudi Rasmussen discuss. So if you can draw this connection across the prescribed readings, it'll really demonstrate a very successful integration of material. The tools of cultural diplomacy is language, teaching, educational exchanges, exhibitions, sport exchanges, cinema, art, etc. For Rwanda, the Arsenal partnership functions as cultural diplomacy. It uses the universal language of football to associate Rwanda with aspiration, excitement, and global participation. Soft power versus hard power. This is the most important concept that we're discussing here on this slide. And it's also one of the most important in the entire Learning Unit 7 for exam purposes. Hard power includes military instruments, economic sanctions, coercion. It's expensive in finance and in human lives, and it often generates resentment rather than compliance. It's unsustainable in the long run and damaging to diplomatic relationships. Soft power, on the other hand, achieves aims through the attractiveness of culture, values, and ideas. This mechanism is not compulsion, but inspiration. If people want to be associated with what Rwanda represents, conservation, development, governance, efficiency, they will support Rwanda's interests voluntarily. Rwanda's entire international strategy is a soft power strategy. It has no significant military capacity to project internationally and no economic leverage over major powers. What it has is a compelling narrative, which it deploys through public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, tourism, and media engagement. So now before we move to tourism, let's look at propaganda, a darker but analytically important form of traditional diplomacy. Propaganda is included in Learning Unit 7 as a form of traditional public diplomacy. And while it may seem like an unusual concept to apply to Rwanda, it has genuine analytical relevance here. So let's look at the definition. Propaganda is the management of collective attitudes by the manipulation of significant symbols. Traditional public diplomacy seeks to create a favorable image of a country's policy, conduct and political or economic systems, persuading foreign publics to accept this image so that they pressure their own governments towards less hostile policy. Let's unpack. Firstly, and very importantly, is the concept of management of collective attitudes. So propaganda is not about individual persuasion. It targets society-level attitude formation and change. Secondly, the manipulation of significant symbols. Symbols, images, narratives, flags, landmarks, all of these can be deployed as propaganda tools. Rwanda's guerrilla image, its clean streets imagery, its Vision 2050 development narrative, they're all significant symbols being managed. Now, this is not to say Rwanda is engaged in propaganda in the pejorative sense. All nation states that manage their international image engage in this kind of symbolic management. The Learning Unit 7 text notes that propaganda seeks to create a favorable image of a country's policy, conduct, and political and economical systems. This is identical to what contemporary place branding scholars describe as place image construction. And then we look the case study in Learning Unit 7 of the study guide looks at the ANC's anti-apartheid case study. This case study is important for several reasons. First, it illustrates how propaganda and counter-propaganda operate in an international communication context. Secondly, it shows how a non-state actor, at that point the ANC, used international media strategically to counter state propaganda, the apartheid government's international image management. Third, it provides an African example that actually contextualizes Rwanda's own situation. So the ANC used two strategies. Firstly, the approach established global media to influence their framing, and two, to build alternative self-controlled media channels. Rwanda does the same. It courts international media through PR and events while also building its own digital channels like Visit Rwanda and government social media. The shameful reenactment at Trafalgar Square illustrates political drama as communication strategy. High visibility symbolic action that generates immediate media coverage. Rwanda's CHOGM 2022 and WEF hosting are sophisticated versions of the same strategy. The ANC eventually created such a robust alternative public sphere in forms of books, films, posters, and events that its narrative competed effectively with the apartheid government's official messaging. Rwanda's critics, like the HRW and Amnesty International, are doing something analogous. They are creating an alternative information ecosystem that competes with Rwanda's official narrative. Rwanda Parallel, where we can look now how does all of this parallel, as Rwanda operates in an information environment structurally similar to the ANC apartheid dual narrative situation. Official positive messaging alongside a contested stream of critical content that it cannot suppress. The difference is that Rwanda is in the position of the state trying to manage its image, not the opposition trying to contest it. So now let's pull all the diplomacy content together through the lens of Rwanda specifically. So let's firstly then look at formal diplomacy. The evidence of formal diplomacy is CHOGM 2022, WEF Africa 2018, and these are all formal diplomatic events that Rwanda has positioned itself to host. The formal status of these events, CHOGM is literally a meeting of heads of government, gives Rwanda's diplomatic standing a legitimacy that commercial marketing cannot purchase. And if we look at it from the context of your prescribed reading by Rasmussen, Rasmussen argues that nation branding functions as a new form of public relations for states. Formal diplomatic events are PR events, at the highest possible level. Hosting heads of state is the PR campaign. And I think a very, very cool recent example, or not necessarily cool, but very interesting, is China hosting the US. And there has been so much of it in the news, and it is very, very much a PR campaign. And one can argue for which country it was most positive. So you'll see that in question 4, in sub-question B, we ask you to critically evaluate this claim using Rwanda's case. The CHOGM evidence both confirms and complicates Rasmussen's argument. So now let's look at public diplomacy. The evidence is the Visit Rwanda digital platform, the Arsenal shirt, government social media, influencer partnerships, diplomatic missions amplifying the brand. And each of these is a state or state-affiliated actor using media to reach foreign publics. And here we can link to Jane and Winner, which argues that news media, both public relations activity and news coverage, constructs country reputation. Rwanda's public diplomacy apparatus generates media coverage, which then becomes the news media environment that Jane and Winner theorize. You can also, in this case, then explain that this media PR reputation circuit, in this case, is a very good example. Now we look at cultural diplomacy. The evidence here is guerrilla trekking as a cultural or ecotourism product. Rwanda hosting AU and UN events, academic exchanges facilitated through conference tourism, and Rwanda positioning Kigali as a neutral African hub. And this links to the idea of soft power. Cultural diplomacy is soft power in action. Rwanda's conservation narrative, its development story, and its governance efficiency are the cultural assets through which it exercises soft power influence over international audiences. Finally, let's look at media diplomacy. The evidence is Rwandan diplomatic missions abroad amplifying national brand through their own social media, so turning diplomats into PR actors. At the same time, we have critical media, the HRW, Amnesty International, coverage of DRC, which operates as a counter media diplomacy that Rwanda must respond to. Now we shift to the second major section of Learning Unit 7 that the exam directly assesses, and that is international tourism. So let's quickly look at sort of the definition here. Tourism is one of the most important components of the international flow of people and the world's largest industry. Back in 1964 already, McLuhan referred to tourists as change agents that help make the world a global village. McLuhan's global village concept suggests that tourism promotes intercultural understanding and that it breaks down barriers. Tourists carry their culture to host countries and they bring the host culture home with them. And that functions then as a cultural exchange. And this is the idealistic, humanistic view of tourism. On the other hand, Balk says tourists are walking billboards. This complicates McLuhan's idealism. Tourists don't just promote understanding, they also advertise their home culture's consumer goods, their values, and their lifestyle. Wealthy tourists in developing countries are visible markers of economic inequality. So, from Balk's perspective, tourism can be an agent of cultural imperialism, where we see the imposing of values and consumer patterns of developed countries on developing ones. In the case of Rwanda, we see how Rwanda must manage this tension. Guerrilla trekking attracts wealthy Western tourists whose visible presence in Kigali reinforces economic inequality while also generating tourism revenue. So what are the 6 influencing factors that influence the international flow of tourists? We have leisure and time. In terms of Rwanda, this one is less relevant. Rwanda doesn't primarily compete for mass leisure tourism from retirees, and this is where we generally see this. The economic factors, where we have tourist generating regions versus tourist destination regions, and this is an important analytic vocabulary. Rwanda is a TDR, a tourist destination region. Its relatively weak currency and developing economy status makes it an affordable destination for tourists from tourist generating regions like Europe, North America, and East Asia. The gorilla trekking permit, which is $1,500, is deliberately expensive to position Rwanda at the premium end of the TDR spectrum. Another factor is technology. So that's ICT and transport, and this is directly relevant once again. Rwandair's 30 plus destinations expand the distribution channel, as we've discussed in Learning Unit 5. And in terms of ICT, Visit Rwanda's digital platform, Destination Management Systems, enables Rwanda to reach international tourists directly without intermediaries. Then we have the environmental and green factors, and this is highly relevant. Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park and its mountain gorilla population are environmental assets that drive ecotourism. Natural hazards in the region could deter tourists. Rwanda's political stability is presented as a counter to this concern. Now we have political factors, and this is also crucial for Rwanda. The visa policy, which has become streamlined for many nationalities, is a political decision that facilitates tourism. At the same time, international political unrest and the DRC border conflict create risk for Rwanda's tourism image. Political violence near Rwanda's borders could deter tourists, even if Kigali itself is stable. And then we have culture and heritage. Once again, the gorilla trekking experience, Kigali's architectural development, and the genocide memorial sites. They all constitute Rwanda's cultural and heritage tourism offering. So the 6 factors explain what draws tourists to Rwanda. Now let's examine who the key actors in this process are. So in terms of question 6 of the exam portfolio, this is really the single most important theoretical framework. Mulwana's 4 actors model must be known in depth. The question 6 sub-question on international tourism explicitly asks you to draw on the tourism industry actors, the tourist, the host, the travel industry, and the government. So let's look at actor 1, the tourist. The tourist is not simply a passive recipient of the tourism experience. They're an active information seeker and cultural carrier. Travel motivations include social status, escape, overcoming isolation, and pleasure. Information sources include the internet, which is the most important, TV travel channels, brochures, and travel agents. What is critical here is information sources are not always objective. Travel magazines are more promotional than factual. This means tourists arrive with pre-formed expectations shaped by promotional content, and when the reality differs, impressions are disrupted. Now let's look at the next actor, which is the host. The host creates a desirable image, a local color that is often far removed from real circumstances. This is analytically important because it normalizes image construction as a tourism practice. All destinations create a package image for tourists. The question for Rwanda is not whether it creates a polished image, because all destinations do, but whether the gap between the image and the underlying reality is uniquely problematic given the political repression evidence. The economic versus the cultural and social impact point is also important here. Historically, tourism impact was evaluated economically in terms of jobs and foreign exchange, but increasingly the cultural and social effects are emphasized. Locals are employed as waiters and guides while tourists enjoy luxury. Western norms are imposed on developing country hosts' populations, and this is the basis for tourism criticism. The third actor is the travel industry. The travel industry packages the fantasy. It is the intermediary that translates Rwanda's raw tourism asset into a consumer product. For Rwanda, we have Rwandair that creates the transport infrastructure, the Kigali Convention Center that creates the conference product, the tour operators that create the gorilla trekking package, Visit Rwanda, which create the digital marketing platform. All of these together constitute a comprehensive travel industry ecosystem. The gatekeeping and agenda setting function here is also relevant. The travel industry determines what aspects of Rwanda tourists encounter, in what sequence, and with what framing. A tourist who only uses Rwandair and stays at Kigali Marriott and treks gorillas through a licensed operator experience a very carefully created version of Rwanda. The travel industry has therefore set their tourism agenda. And then the final actor is the government. The government has a twofold role: participation and regulation. And this is particularly interesting for Rwanda because both roles are played by the same highly centralized Kagame government. This makes Rwanda an analytically unusual case. The government is the marketing body and the regulatory authority and the national brand owner. There is no separation between the state's governance function and its tourism promotion function. So let's now focus on the specific tourism formats that we see that question 6 directly assesses, and that is conferences, sport events, and academic exchanges. For question 6, we give you a choice of 3 dimensions. This slide covers 2 of them, the conference/event tourism and academic sport cultural exchanges, which together with ecotourism, which is covered in the next slide, constitute all 3 options. Moana says that academic, cultural, religious, and sport exchanges are more concerned with quality than quantity of communication. They target specific individuals who often become future leaders. So this quality versus quantity point is important. And we'll start by unpacking this important distinction. Mass tourism is primarily about quantity, large numbers of visitors generating aggregate economic benefit. Academic, cultural, religious, and sport exchanges are different. They prioritize quality of communication. A small number of international academics attending a conference in Kigali generate less aggregate economic activity than 10,000 beach tourists, but the quality of the diplomatic and reputational impact is potentially far higher. These exchanges target specific individuals who often become the future leaders of their communities or countries, precisely the decision makers Rwanda wants to influence. When we look at conference and event tourism, it is arguably the most relevant dimension for Rwanda given the scenario's emphasis on CHOGM and WEF. Conferences provide forum for exchange of information and negotiation. It provides public attention focused on worldwide issues and an opportunity for developing countries to voice their needs. Rwanda has positioned itself as Africa's conference capital. The Kigali Conference Center, which is amongst Africa's largest, is the infrastructure investment underpinning this strategy. When the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is held in Kigali, the city receives enormous international media coverage that no advertising budget can replicate. This is conference tourism as diplomatic communication. The hosting of international events is the message. So let's look then here at an analytical point. We ask of you in question 6 to analyze conference tourism as a form of diplomatic communication. And this is the key theoretical framing. The conference itself is a communication act. Rwanda is communicating to the world that it is stable, capable, and internationally recognized. The presence of 56 world leaders in Kigali communicates Rwanda's normalization as a functioning state more powerfully than any press release. When we look at sports and cultural exchanges, major sports events shift host country perceptions dramatically. Learning Unit 7, for example, uses the 2010 FIFA World Cup as an example of how South Africa's development image was transformed internationally. Rwanda uses a different mechanism. Rather than hosting a mega event, which it cannot afford, it attaches itself to an existing global event, Arsenal in the Premier League, as a named sponsor. The effect is similar. Millions of people visit Rwanda on the Arsenal shirts and associate Rwanda with the excitement and aspiration of world-class football. The Vuvuzela example from the 2010 World Cup is instructive here. A single cultural artifact became a global commodity and symbol of South Africa. Rwanda's gorilla image functions analogously. It is the single most recognizable cultural symbol of Rwanda globally. Now let's look at academic and student exchanges. This dimension is less directly evidenced in the Rwanda scenario, but it is theoretically important. Learning Unit 7 notes that students studying abroad become tourists in host countries, and that international student numbers for South Africa, for example, grew 12.4% in 2008-2009. Rwanda's ambitions in this space are visible in Kigali Innovation City, and its positioning for knowledge economy investment. So before we look at our synthesis slide, let's now look at how tourism affects information at 3 levels. But before that even, let's quickly look at ecotourism. No, we are moving on, sorry. So this slide covers the 3-level information flow framework, which is an important theoretical tool for question 6. Students who can organize their answers around these 3 levels will show to us a very high level of theoretical sophistication beyond just describing. So let's look at the global level. At the global level first. At the global level, tourism affects the structural relationships between nations. The key insight here is that international tourism changes who participates in international interaction. It is no longer only state representatives, like diplomats and politicians, who engage across borders. Tourists, tour operators, and TNCs in the tourism industry all engage internationally. This is the internationalization of international communication that Learning Unit 7 identifies as a central theme. For Rwanda, every international tourist arriving in Kigali, every conference delegate participating in CHOGM, every investor visiting Kigali Innovation City, all of these are international interactions that generate information flows that affect Rwanda's global reputational positioning. The cumulative effect of millions of such interactions shapes how Rwanda is perceived globally, independently of its own messaging. Then we look at the societal level. Tourism promotes a two-way flow of information between societies. This is McLuhan's global village dynamic in practice. Tourists bring information about their culture to the host city and carry information about the host culture home. The important critical note here is that this flow is not equal. International tourism is characterized by a north-south flow. Tourists from developed to developing countries. So the cultural influence of wealthy Western tourists visiting Rwanda is more pronounced than the influence of Rwandan culture on tourist-generating societies. And this creates the window dressing risk. If Rwanda's tourism experience is entirely calibrated to Western tourist expectations, luxury hotels, English-speaking guides, Western food options, the two-way cultural exchange is compromised. Tourists experience a version of Rwanda designed for their comfort, not an authentic encounter with Rwandan culture and society. And then let's look at the individual level. This is in some ways the most powerful level. Interpersonal interaction between tourists and host people is seen by many people as the most credible source of information about a country and its culture. When a tourist trekking gorillas in Volcanoes National Park has a conversation with a Rwandan guide, that interaction carries more weight than any press release, social media post, or diplomatic statement. The window dressing problem is most acute at the individual level. If tourists only encounter the curated luxury version of Rwanda and never look beyond the hotel and the national park, tourism as a form of international communication is compromised. It may become yet another form of political proselytization where international communication becomes the vehicle for manipulation. This is the wording from Learning Unit 7, and it echoes the claim that we've made in question 7. So the Rwanda application here, if you are at a higher level of sophistication in terms of reading your articles, etc., you will note that some forms of Rwanda's tourism, the genocide memorial visits, community-based tourism projects, do allow tourists to engage with Rwanda's complexity at the individual level. These are important counterexamples to the window dressing critique. So let's now look at the alternative forms of tourism that are particularly relevant to Rwanda's ecotourism positioning. Alternative tourism is important for question 6 because Rwanda's most internationally distinctive tourism product, gorilla trekking, is a form of ecotourism. Okay, so ecotourism. The definition of ecotourism emphasizes ecological and social consciousness. Ecotourism appeals to tourists who are values-driven. They want their travel to be consistent with their environmental and social commitments. And this is precisely the segment Rwanda targets with its gorilla conservation narrative. The Volcanoes National Park, the mountain gorilla families, the tracking experience, all are positioned as ecotourism products. The premium pricing strategy is actually consistent with ecotourism logic. High per visitor revenue with low visitor numbers reduces environmental impact while maximizing economic return. This is ecotourism's distinctive economic model compared with mass beach tourism. So if we look at how this connects to your exam question, Rwanda is not just incidentally offering ecotourism. It has built its entire international identity around a single ecotourism asset. And this makes Rwanda's case unusually focused and unusually dependent on the continued health of its gorilla population. Any threat to the mountain gorillas would simultaneously be an ecological disaster and a reputational crisis. This brings us to social tourism, which is less relevant and to Rwanda's international strategy, which is predominantly premium oriented. However, the principle, making tourism accessible for all budgets and ages, including through backpacker accommodation and youth lodges, reflects a tourism equity concern that is worth noting. Finally, we look at solidarity tourism. This is analytically the most interesting alternative form for Rwanda. Solidarity tourism involves visits motivated by specific shared interest or identity. The most directly Rwanda applicable form of solidarity tourism is genocide memorial tourism. Visitors from around the world, including many from the African diaspora and from countries whose governments participated in the decisions that enabled the genocide, visiting Kigali specifically to engage with its history. The Kigali Genocide Memorial is one of Rwanda's most visited sites. This is solidarity tourism that engages directly with Rwanda's most painful history. And Rwanda's government has made the strategic decision to include genocide memorialization as part of its tourism offering, rather than suppressing or minimizing it. It is a sophisticated reputational choice, incorporating the genocide into the national narrative as a story of survival, resilience, and transformation, rather than hiding it. Let's now pull everything together and look at this synthesis slide that really connects Learning Unit 7 to Question 7. Question 7 says, Rwanda's international reputation is primarily the product of a sophisticated communication strategy rather than genuine socio-political transformation. In the long run, reputation built on branding cannot be sustained without the underlying reality. So here, let's then bridge the content of Learning Unit 7 and this critical reflection requirement. When we look at that claim at the top of the page, it has three components. Rwanda's reputation is primarily produced by communication strategy, which is not genuine transformation. 2, this strategy is sophisticated. So implicitly, we're saying the strategy works, at least in the short term. And 3, in the long run, branding without underlying reality is unsustainable. You need to take a very clear stance in question 7. You will agree, you will disagree, or you will take a nuanced position and you will defend it. So let's look at support for the claim. Public diplomacy, as Gilbao looks at it, is explicitly designed to create images that influence foreign publics. And this is its function. Rwanda is doing exactly what Gilbao's framework describes. The fact that Rwanda does public diplomacy so effectively is not evidence of transformation. It is evidence of communication sophistication. The tourism host image concept by proposed by Mulwana is perhaps the most powerful Learning Unit 7 point in support of the claim. Host countries create desirable images that are often far removed from real circumstances. This is a structural feature of tourism, and Rwanda uses it deliberately. The gorillas are real, but the image of Rwanda as fully democratic, press-free, and politically open is not. When we look at it from a propaganda or symbolic management point of view, Rwanda's entire brand strategy is the management of collective attitudes by the manipulation of significant symbols. Literally, Laswell's definition of propaganda. This doesn't make Rwanda's strategy illegitimate, but it does mean you can characterize it accurately using this vocabulary. And then from a soft power limitation perspective, Hayden argues soft power is effective when it reflects genuine underlying values. If Rwanda's soft power narrative is not anchored in genuine democratization and human rights protection, its credibility will erode over time, as the gap between narrative and reality becomes undeniable. If you want to look at Learning Unit 7 to counter the claim, cultural diplomacy requires genuine cultural assets, mountain gorillas, Lake Kivu, Nyungwe Forest, Kigali's architecture. These are real. Rwanda has not invented these assets. The communication strategy communicates real things. It is the selection and framing that is strategic, not the fabrication of non-existent achievements. When you look at the conference and event tourism, CHOGM actually happened. WF actually happened. 56 world leaders actually came to Kigali. These are not communication artifacts. They are documented international events with real diplomatic consequences. Then we can look at the ecotourism. The gorilla population is growing. This is a verifiable counter-argument. Rwanda's mountain gorilla conservation program has increased the gorilla population from approximately 250 in the 1980s to over 600 today. This is a genuine, measurable environmental achievement that underpins the ecotourism product. It is not merely branded, it is real. Then, the individual level impressions. Tourists who visit Kigali and have direct interpersonal encounters with Rwandan people form impressions based on the lived experience. The cleanest, most orderly city many African visitors have ever seen is a real experience, not an illusion. These individual level impressions carry enormous credibility because they are personal. And then we look at female parliamentary representation. Over 60% female representation in parliament is a verifiable, internationally recognized statistic. No amount of branding can create this number without the actual policy and electoral changes that produced it. So before we close, let's then just look at the key theoretical terms and concepts from Learning Unit 7. This is sort of a rapid consolidation exercise. We did the same for Learning Unit 5. And these are all related then directly to your exam portfolio. Diplomacy, this is the foundation definition. It has 3 functions: clarify positions, seek information, and persuade. So any answer on question 4 that does not cite Gilbao for the definition of diplomacy will lose marks. Public diplomacy, the shift from government to government, formal, to government to foreign public, is the key analytical distinction here. Rwanda's entire digital strategy is public diplomacy. Agenda setting. The media tells the public what to think about. This is the mechanism through which media constructs Rwanda's reputation, by deciding which Rwanda stories receive coverage. The distinction from framing: agenda setting determines what is covered. Framing determines how it is covered. Framing, we looked at the 5 frames: responsibility, conflict, human interest, economic consequences, and morality. The choice of frame will depend on the outlet type. And here we have the distinction between serious and sensationalist. Cultural diplomacy. Here we have government-driven but the non-political facade. It serves national interests through cultural channels, and the tools are language teaching, educational exchanges, exhibitions, and sport. In the case of Rwanda, we have the Arsenal partnership as cultural diplomacy. Soft power, as proposed by Hayden. This is the attractiveness of culture, values, and ideas, and not coercion. Rwanda's primary power, and it's Rwanda's primary power resource. The 4 tourism actors: the tourist, the host, the travel industry, and the government. TGRs and TDRs, tourist generating regions, wealthy with strong currencies, versus tourist destination regions, developing with weak currencies. Rwanda is a TDR competing for visitors from TGRs. And understanding this helps explain Rwanda's premium pricing strategy. Ecotourism, ecologically and socially conscious tourism. Rwanda's gorilla trekking is the paradigm case here. The premium pricing and the low volume is an ecotourism economic model. And finally, solidarity tourism. Interest, identity motivated visits. The Genocide Memorial Tourism. This is Rwanda's solidarity tourism product. And it's an important counterexample to the purely aspirational tourism narrative. So that is then where we end off this discussion on Learning Unit 7. Please take the time to listen to this or watch this presentation several times, work through the concepts, take note of where what is linked to the exam portfolio. Thank you, students, for joining me and listening to this presentation.